Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Adams. I'm filling in for Ben Eady today. I'm the online community manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled Requirements for Business Analytics. Today's featured speaker is Joy Beatty from C-Level. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the Q&A session at the end. So be sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the GoToWebinar software. I'd like to say thank you to digibytes.com for sponsoring this event. Digibytes is the online library of solutions for business analysts and technology professionals, offering resources such as on-demand webinars, white papers, case studies, and much more. And at this time, I will turn it over to Joy Beatty to get us started.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you to Digibytes for your sponsorship of this. And welcome, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, just depending on the part of the world that you're in. I'm going to start, well, very quickly, this is just a little glimpse into my background. I work for a company called C-Level. We're focused on how do we help our customers deliver successful products, and we do that with a focus on business analysis requirements through services and training. So let me get into the interesting stuff. This is a little intro to what I'm going to talk about today. Three big topics here. First, we're going to go through an overview of what is big data and analytics to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. But more importantly, I hope to make you really excited about this topic with some examples and stories that got me excited about the topic. I'll spend most of the session today on actual approaches that you can use for requirements. How do you elicit and specify the requirements in analytics projects? And then finally, I'm going to leave you with a few takeaways so that you can action immediately when you walk out of this webinar. And potentially, even if you're not on an analytics project, there's something out of that I think you'll be able to use today. So let's get started. Whether you know it or not, big data and analytics are being used on you every day. The website ads that are displayed to you, the suggested products for you to buy, the coupons that get printed at the grocery store, the insurance premium changes that you very likely saw in the last year, diagnostic test results that maybe you got at a doctor visit recently. On the screen here, these are some examples from sites that I use regularly. One is for shopping, the other is a professional connections website. And if you look at the different marketing ads being displayed here, and if you knew anything about me, you would know that these are spot on for marketing straight at me. So I've kind of highlighted a few examples here, like the running shoe. Yep, I run. Very interested in books. This is a product that I buy. I don't buy it from this shop, but yet it knows it's a product that I would probably want to buy. It's tax season, so it's pushing tax software on me. Over on the right, you can see things like, yeah, I'm a woman, I live in Texas. Those are, again, just spot on for describing me. So somebody's doing some really good analysis behind this so that it can focus ads on me. And I'm sure you've all had similar experiences. You've browsed the web, and it's like, wow, I think it's almost creepy how much they know about me sometimes. There's a pretty famous story that I'm going to share with you because not everybody has heard it. It's about Target, and it's not the one about credit card problems. But what happened here was there was a guy who started getting mail ads, like in his mailbox from Target. And these mail ads were pushing pregnancy items on him, like over and over again, just a real focus on pregnancy stuff, and this bothered him a lot. You know, he was married, his kids were a bit older, he didn't understand what was going on. So he took his ad, he marched into the local Target store, and he tore into a manager over this. And of course, the manager's so far removed from those ads being printed that, you know, he doesn't even know what to do about it. Well, a couple weeks later, that same guy had to come back and apologize to the manager. It turns out his teenage daughter was pregnant, and Target figured it out before he had. And that, folks, is big data and analytics working for better or worse. Let's take a stroll down memory lane. Back in the time, you know, back before we had this thing called the internet. Back in the day, we used to look people up in a phone book. Maybe we were tethered to a wall when we made phone calls. We rented movies and they were on cassettes. We folded maps, stuck them in our glove boxes of our cars. You know, we used library cards. We mailed memos, inter-office memos to one another. And we bought physical CDs that had music on them. in reality, it wasn't that long ago that all of these things were a regular thing, right? But sometime between way back then and now, the internet changed the world that we live in. So I would argue the internet was this big game changer in our world. And so that makes me stop and ask, okay, well, what's the next big game changer for us? The reality is the internet has led us to this thing called big data because it's now so easy to collect massive amounts of information about users, about what they like, what they don't like, who their friends are. You know, businesses can track where do their users go? What do their users buy? What ads do they respond to? Who are their friends? Who are they calling? But that data isn't useful in and of itself because it's so big. There's so much information. And that is why we need analytics. Analytics turns that massive amount of information into something useful, and it helps us glean the interesting tidbits from all of that data. So with that, I would argue that big data and analytics are today's game changers. We're currently seeing a major transformation in our daily lives as a result of the big data and analytics. So as a consumer, you're going to run into it every single time you buy. As a business, we're changing how we run our organizations. And the nature of analytics is that sometimes you're going to notice it, sometimes you won't. Um, Sometimes it's not going to work out like you hoped. Sometimes it might be used for nefarious purposes, right? There's just a whole wide range of things that are happening because of this. But regardless, I propose that I think big data and analytics, that's our big game changer. And you might be thinking, so what? I'm a business analyst. I'm a product manager. I just show up and I do business analysis on projects and I go home, right? Who cares? Why is this topic even of interest to me? Well, first of all, if you haven't been on an analytics project yet, your day is coming. If your IT executives aren't running analytics projects, they're behind. And I'm relatively sure they'll be launching one soon. Corporate America, for sure, I can say that of. We are seeing a huge shift in that. Most organizations are already doing some kind of analytics projects. It's something like 90% of the Fortune 500 companies are using business analytics to run their organization. So if you haven't seen it yet, they're out there. They're probably out there in your company. And you can expect, if you haven't seen it, you will see it soon. Now, analytics, this isn't necessarily a new concept or a new topic. However, they're getting more complicated, the projects are. And I think partially this is because the data is growing exponentially. I think it's partially because what we want to do with that data is growing. We're trying to push the limits a bit further is what I'll say. But the good news is that there are a lot of IT projects in place so that it's like making analytics easier to use. And it's good news for those of us who work in that space, either the IT space where we're implementing these projects or the business side where we're driving these projects. So it's kind of fun and new and exciting. But either way, there's projects out there trying to make these analytics solutions much, much easier and more consumable. In the news recently, I thought this was really interesting. Amazon announced that they wanted to start shipping packages to you before you even ordered them. It's called anticipatory shipping. And what they're doing is they're trying to reduce how long it takes you to get your purchase by predicting what you're going to buy and having it nearby so that they can deliver it immediately. So when you go online and you click buy, literally even maybe that day it could be at your front door because it happens to be sitting in a warehouse around the corner from you. The only way that they could possibly do something like this is through having so much big data and analytics. Right, so that's just, again, another real-world example of where our world is headed because of these kinds of projects. Now, I'd like to do a poll question here, and so Chris, I think, is going to launch this poll for us. What I want you to do, just to get a feel for what kind of audience mix we have right now, think about this. Are you and your company working on analytics projects? And I'm giving you 5 different choices here. So pick out where you sit. So either yes, we have lots of analytics projects. Number 2 answer is we are, and I get to work on them. Number 3 is yes, but I'm not working on them. Like, you know they're happening in your company, but you're not part of them. Number 4, don't really know whether our company's doing it or not. And then number 5, no, you're not doing them at all. So it looks like those answers are coming in. We'll give it another minute here. I will tell you there is a definite domination in the middle, number 3. All right. Let's just see here. Okay, it looks like, if I read this correctly, I believe that you are now looking at the results, right? So oh, absolutely, we are doing this. those are probably people who have companies that are very, very focused on analytics. That's what I'm guessing that means, and it's about 10% of you there. Like I said, I think that middle range, answers 2, 3, and 4, that's where my experience is that most people sit. My prediction is that if I ask this same question in a year, I will see a shift of people moving from number 3 to number 2, where, yep, you know your company is doing them, but you're not working on them, into, oh yeah, I have gotten to work on some of those projects. So, okay, thanks. What I would say, getting back to why you should care about this topic, whether you're a business analyst, a manager of BAs, or some other related field, I realize there's lots of titles for those, but why do you care, right? So what I would say is that given the prevalence of these projects, the reality is that everybody who works in this space, particularly the requirement space, has got to be well versed on the ins and outs of analytics and big data, because it's coming, right? So I would like for people to start to familiarize themselves with the concepts, even if they haven't worked on it yet. So in these projects, we need to know, how do we elicit the requirements for these projects? We need to be able to push our organizations on new ideas and creative solutions, like new possibilities with solutions. And so that's that third point there. We are going to be looked at to help guide our companies down the path. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's necessary in a bit. The good news is that whether you're a business analyst or a product manager working on these projects, you're not alone in this space. There are actually people who specialize in analyzing and transferring data. And they've been working on analytics projects longer than most of us. Typically, you'll hear them called data scientists, or data analysts is another similar related role. And what I will say is that, when companies are serious about doing stuff with their data, they have this role filled. And it's really cool. What I will also tell you, though, is that these people are not experts in business analysis and requirements. And organizations can't afford to not have that skill set in place, too, which is why the business analyst role is still really important. Because at the end of the day, we still have to understand, what are the business objectives we're trying to achieve? What are maybe some extraneous features? What are the missed requirements? We need to uncover all of those things sooner than later, and that is where business analysis skills come into play, just like on these projects and any other kind of IT software type project. So what I'm trying to say is that these are not unique in that particular sense. Now, I want to take a moment before I get into the BA practices to make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. So when I say business analytics project, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm talking about strategic projects that turn large and often highly complex data sets into meaningful information for which conclusive decisions and actions can be derived. Right, that was a mouthful, so let me say it again. So again, you take highly complex data sets, we do some analysis on it, and that leads us to meaningful information that ultimately lets us make decisions that lead us to take some kind of action in our organization. And that meaningful information that we're looking at might be observations, it could be recommendations, it could be predictions even. And again, analytics isn't new. We just have to get better and faster at making decisions using analytics. And the great thing about this is that it's been demonstrated that decision making is better if organizations are using analytics, which makes sense, right? That our analysis would give us better data than our gut feeling, for example. But there's actually been some studies that demonstrate that, which is great. Now, in the past, organizations that deployed analytics projects primarily focused on what the industry would call descriptive analytics. This is things like looking at a report that tells a stakeholder what maybe happened in the past or what is happening right now in their organization. And recent trends are showing a shift towards more organizations using what we call predictive analytics, the top of that arrow. So users are analyzing information to predict what might happen in the future, as opposed to trying to interpret what happened in the past. Let me let that diagram fill in. So this shows you the various types of analytics across that spectrum, from descriptive at the bottom to predictive at the top. So we can have analytics that range from things like standard reports about past data to, right in the middle, statistical analysis, maybe to find some hidden patterns of what's going on. Or up at the top, it's things like making optimizations based on predictions of where they think the data shows that we're going. So I thought this was really helpful for me when I was introduced to the topics of analytics, just to really think about, there is such a huge spectrum of things that we can do with analytics. I think it's also important we stop and talk about what big data means. The term big data commonly refers to sets of data characterized by volume, so that's how much data is there. Variety, how diverse is that data? And velocity, this one's interesting, how rapidly the data is flowing into an organization. Here's an interesting tidbit about data. A commercial aircraft generates 10 terabytes of data in a 30-minute flight. That's insane to me, but it's kind of cool too. And imagine if they could actually do something with all of that data. And they're moving that direction. I do think that for the most part, a lot of that data gets dumped at the end of the flight. All right, so this is great, but data is boring in and of itself. People don't look at it for fun. Executives are always asking for more data. They want to see more data, collect more data, right? But what they really want are dashboards that summarize the interesting things about the data. And this is a really key takeaway today, and I will repeat it later throughout the conversation because it's that important. Executives are looking at the data to make decisions. They're not looking at it for fun. They're looking at it because they've got to make some kind of decision about doing something in their organization. That's the only reason they're looking at the data. Again, we're going to talk more about decisions shortly, but I just want to make sure we're clear about this is why big data matters, right, in analytics. And it's not about looking at data for fun. I'm going to tell you, there's a really cool TV show, at least I thought it was cool, but apparently it wasn't that good because it got canceled. But it's called Intelligence, and I think that's really neat because it really is about big data. In this particular show, the lead actor had a chip embedded inside his head that effectively hooked his brain up to the internet so that as he senses things, he immediately pulls relevant data to the forefront of his mind based on whatever he's seeing or hearing or any kind of sensing. And then, for example, he can see a face of a random person walk by, and his brain would pull up all kinds of information about that person using facial recognition. And then, basically the big data that is in the internet was connected into his head. So like at one point, the guy is standing in this deserted warehouse, very dramatic effect, and three guys walk in. They look seemingly harmless, but he looks at them and his mind could immediately pull up this relevant data to tell him that they were bad guys. So he knew to immediately react and get out of harm's way, and certain enough, they then started shooting at him. So he ducked behind some boxes and didn't get hurt. It was great. Anyway, like I said, the show didn't make it, but I thought the concept was really cool because it just shows the possibilities with big data are amazing and scary at some level. A more, I think, relevant, because the show didn't get canceled, example though is look at some of the things that are happening with Netflix right now, or Yahoo and Amazon are going down this path where they're actually competing with the major networks for entertainment, right? So Netflix is actually going out and basically producing their own TV shows, and they're doing it because they have so much massive amounts of data from their audience about what their data is interested in. So they can make really smart decisions about investing in TV and have a pretty good idea of how well it will succeed or not. And this is so different than, if we go sort of the route of Nielsen ratings, which are very much a one-way fixed questions sort of path. It's not real-time data, not real-time analysis. And so it's neat to me to see these kinds of changes happening in a very fun way that you would like to expect that TV shows and movies will get better and better over time, just simply because they have more information. All right, we're going to do a quick activity here to drive the point home. So in this activity, we have to imagine that we all sell cars. So you, me, everybody here on the phone, we sell cars. And at the moment a customer enters our store, we want to pair them with the car that we think that they want as fast as we can, right? I don't want to spend half an hour trying to sell them on minivans when that they really want is a motorcycle, okay? So we're going to play along at home with this activity. I'm going to show you 5 different characters on the top and 5 different vehicles on the bottom, and I'd like you, and you can do this, you can type in the questions if you want, or you can just think about it on your own. But I'd like you to try and pair each person with the car that we think they would most want to buy. And be patient with our drawings here. We're trying not to offend anyone. It's really actually quite hard to draw these to figure out the right characters to use. But take a minute and see if you can pair up. Who do you think goes together? And then I'll just kind of show you the answers in a minute. So, number 1, we might think this guy over here on the left go to the motorcycle, right? Okay, and then what about the woman here with the 2 kids? All right, so I've got somebody saying 2 goes with B. Perfect, good. Right, the minivan. I think that's a pretty good guess. This is Patty, by the way. All right, let's look at number 3. Which one is he going to drive? Right, a lot of people are saying 3 wants D, the truck. Good. All right, number 4, we have this couple here. Where are we heading with them? Yep, absolutely. I think E. A lot of you, I think, are picking E. Good. Good guess. And then number 5 leaves us the obvious answer, the eco-friendly hybrid one, right? So, what happens when I show you this guy? This is Jack. What do you think Jack wants? Anybody want to take a guess? Maybe type some. All right. Yep. Okay. A lot of people are saying the eco-friendly one, and I'm guessing because he's got an organic grocery bag. Right? It could be the big truck. He's got that construction hat on. Maybe it was a pickup truck. That would be a good guess. All right. Minivan because he's got his daughter. Okay. All right. So, what I will say is that in the prior slide, you were pretty much making decisions based on stereotypes. But the reality is that might lead you to the wrong answer. More importantly, sometimes it's not that obvious, like Jack here, right? Who's got the grocery, he's got his daughter, he's got his construction hat. Could be any of these, right? Now, what happens if I give you a little bit more data? What if analytics beforehand told you that, first of all, Jack is married to Patty? What can you discern from this data? Well, things like now you know they're married, they have a son, he's 45, he likes cars, someone thinks he cares about green grocer, somebody thinks he has some interest in higher education. Given that, now what car would you pick? Right? I feel like the answers could change here a little bit. Okay, some people are saying van for kid. I think that's a great guess, right? This is tough, is what I will say. Still want the minivan. Okay, good. Right, okay, there we go. I like the answer. He needs a van to carry all of his stuff. He's about to turn 45. He clearly needs an answer. Good answer. The wife decides. I like Christina's answer. The wife gets to decide. Okay, well, this is fun. Let me do one more page. What if you saw, or one more slide on this. What if you saw his LinkedIn page? Now you know something else. He's the founder and owner of a construction company. Okay, so that might lead us down the path of he wants a truck, right? But one more piece of data. What if you had some information about conversations that he had with his wife? If you read through this, the gist of what he's saying here is that he wants a sports car, right? And his wife is actually going to buy it for him. So Patty, with the 2 kids in tow who walked into the car dealer, didn't actually want a minivan, nor did Jack. What they're looking for is that fancy sports car, right? So knowing this kind of information about him ultimately is just helping you predict the next purchase more easily. Obviously, you still are going to have a conversation with the guy before you sell him a car, but it's just helping you potentially prevent losing a profitable sale by stereotyping, and stereotyping very incorrectly. There you go. There's the sports car. That's what the happy family was looking for. All right. So the reality is big data and analytics, they're not going anywhere. Our lives are forever going to be different. We're going to continue to see changes in the not too distant future that look like cars that drive more safely than we can. They're going to drive for us. Hospitals are going to diagnose our problems faster and more accurately. Everyone's going to have a lot of choices for going to college, all from their living room. Main Street USA is not going to seem like simple small town America anymore because the people and the places will be taken over by analytics. This one's fun. Drugstores are going to actually know you're thinking about becoming pregnant before you do. And ultimately, it's going to just seem like we can predict the future. And we sort of can, but we're doing it through data. We're not just making it up. All right, let me talk about some requirements approaches for analytics now. And by the way, I will say that if you have questions that come up while we're going through this, please type them in the Q&A box. I probably won't get to them till the end. I'll save time for it, but I don't want you to lose your question if one comes up, okay? All right, so implementing analytics in your organization is not as simple as dropping a packaged solution in place and hoping for the best. And I say this because I see a lot of organizations do this. They think that they've bought the analytics solution and now they're done, but they're not done. So I'm hoping I can help you see that you still need to have requirements for these implementations, just like on any other project. You've got to understand things like, what are the new business processes that have to be put in place around this? What are the new business rules that we need, or the old ones that still matter? Some are going to be applied, some aren't, right? And those lead to things like configuration requirements, data requirements, integration requirements to other existing systems, right? So you can't just drop a solution and be done. You've got to integrate your analytics solution into the current IT ecosystem in your organization. Right? And that is where this business analysis stuff is so important. And I'm going to tell you straight up, don't try asking me technical questions like Hadoop and NewSQL. That's not my space. My passion is around software requirements, and how we take those concepts and apply them on analytics projects. Um, so anyway, it's a really fun and exciting space, I think. One of the things that worries me is that studies show us that requirements are critical but often shortcutted in business analytics projects. My anecdotes from my own experiences over the years confirm this, that people either don't know what the outcomes are that they want in all the analytics solutions, or they just want to have it all and they can't make decisions about it. But either way, most IT projects out there, even around analytics, are actually failing. They're not achieving their overall objectives because they just haven't really done the due diligence on the analysis side of things. So why are the requirements in these analytics projects complicated, and potentially more complicated than a typical IT project? What I would say is a couple things here. One is that you might have a whole new type of customer when you go down this path. It could be new internal customers or external customers. So there's a lot of new stakeholders you have to consider. I would also say that we are often radically transforming their experiences. How they use the information, that is, again, the internal stakeholders who are maybe taking the data and doing something with it. We've got to really understand that. That's going to look completely different than it has in the past. But even external, like maybe you're using analytics solutions and pushing that data outward, and they're using it drastically differently. So again, it's that radical transformation that's driving this. And then, like I said, we've got to think about, how do our business processes change? And how does that work with the business rules that we have in place? Or are there new policies that we have to think about, right? Information privacy, things like that become a really big deal in these spaces. So ultimately, this all rolls back to the question of, what are my implementation requirements to support all the stuff that I'm showing you here on the screen? And that is why I think requirements are at the core of deploying these analytics projects. These 4 steps here break down an approach to eliciting and specifying requirements for analytics projects, and I'm going to go into each of these in a bit more detail. But at a high level, first we prioritize our work using decisions. That's different than most projects. Then we define how analytics information is going to get used. Then we look at the data requirements that support the analytics, and then finally we actually have to talk about the transformation or the analysis that happens on the data. Now, on traditional projects, features can be prioritized by considering how they contribute to the business objectives. That's what I would standardly say, this is how we prioritize. However, in analytics projects, it's a little bit different because features aren't sufficient to prioritize with. So instead, what we want to do is look at, what are the business decisions that stakeholders want to make out of the analytics solutions. And we're going to prioritize those decisions about what is the impact of each of those individual decisions. Right? I had a project recently where there were business stakeholders who insisted they had to have 200 different reports out of a system. And when I pressed them to answer the question of, what decision are you going to make from each of those reports, we quickly learned that they didn't need most of them. They only needed about 50 of them. And so we could really drastically cut their scope from 200 down to 50 simply by having them focus on what are they going to do with the data itself, right? And that's a very simple example that we can explode out to say that we can actually do that with our analytics requirements. All right, so where do we define these decisions, right? These key decisions that they want to make. First, we're going to simply talk to the people who make the decisions, right? We use our interviewing techniques. We brainstorm with executives about what decisions they want to make or could want to make with a solution. We can also look at existing business processes to find the decision points in the process. And then another really important thing to do is look at existing reports and dashboards and determine, how are those getting used? What decisions are they making in those today that they may want to continue to make or enhance going forward in the future? And then for each decision you identify, you're going to tie that back to the business objectives to determine which ones are the most important ones. All right, here's a scenario that I'm going to use for a couple different examples of requirements models. In this particular case, we're an executive at a superstore, and we're decided that we're going to put in some technology in our stores. One of the first upgrades is we're going to add facial scanning systems and flat screen TVs throughout the stores. So the facial scanning software identifies who the customer is as they walk through the scanning points. Then, as customers walk by the TV screens, you display customized advertising for that shopper. So there's going to be these short, say 3 to 7 minute or second, video clips advertising kind of key products. And the system's going to determine the best ad to display in each aisle based on who the customer is that's about to walk past it. And you may look at this picture and be thinking, she's in a chip aisle. Why on earth are we displaying a milk carton here? And that is actually exactly the point, is this is analytics at a very personal level, not a generalization about purchasing habits, right? So maybe the system knows that she likes milk and wants to push a brand, or maybe it knows she's trying to take more calcium in based on supplements that she's buying, right? So it's pushing milk to help support that. The point is, it's not about her. It's not about the general population. I'm sorry, it is about her. It's not about the general population. It's really about this particular individual and what we know that she needs most at this moment that we can push on her. Now, as a business analyst, first thing I'm going to do is create a top-level process flow to make sure I understand the scenario and where analytics gets used within the scenario. So if you're familiar with process modeling, good news is you can still use it here. And I talk about the key decisions are the important thing here. Well, the key decision that we're trying to make is ultimately what video ad to display to the customer when they're at a specific location. Now, to further model those decisions, there's a couple models I want to show you. You first need to understand things like what questions are we trying to answer, what are the allowed answers or types of answers, what information is needed to make the decision, what knowledge, governance, or business rules have to be applied to make the decision, or what other decisions have to get made. And we can put all of those pieces of information into a model that we call a decision requirements diagram. And this is what one looks like. This is a model that's adapted from work by James Taylor, if you've heard of him. He's written a lot of stuff in this particular space. You can use these to model any repeatable decision and the requirements for those decisions. The boxes are the decisions, and then any related decisions would be in boxes, kind of, as you can see in a hierarchy here, feeding into the top level decision. The ovals are the data inputs that we need to make the decision. And then the other shape that you see here on the right side, those are for knowledge sources like policies or kind of just organizational know-how maybe. So in our scenario, we know we want to select a video ad. That's kind of the central decision of this. But we also need to know the data, things like customers, their buying history, what are the video ads themselves? Those are pieces of data. We need to know our advertising policies and maybe how our customers react to this type of personalization so that we can dial it back if needed, right? We don't want to freak our customers out so that they all end up walking out the door. Also, we need to know things like traffic levels. I can't show long ads at peak times because I have a lot of customers walking by. So it's just putting all those pieces of data together to help us ultimately make the right decision in the moment. Another model we might create is a decision tree. This is a model that helps us understand the actual detailed logic in making the decisions. This is just a very simple decision tree for our scenario. It's, do we recognize the customer? If not, then we have only one choice, and that's just a generic ad. But if we do, then we ask, do we know anything about them? If so, and let's say it's the holiday season, then we want to have a personalized holiday ad that we would display them. And if not, maybe we can at least use their gender to pick some kind of a target ad. Like we know maybe it's a woman, and so we would display a female-related product, if you're confident that it was a woman. Another similar model that I want to show you is the decision table, very much related to the tree that I just showed you. In some cases, it's simply a different way of displaying the same type of information. Some people find these are easier to use, some don't, so just know that both are available. The idea here is that we can actually capture our business rules in the individual columns, right? So this is a nice way to verify with our stakeholders that the logic we're specifying is correct, and that developers can actually implement right off of these. So in our example, again, if the customer is recognized and we have a customer data available and there's a video ad available, then we display the personalized ad. right? And that is all rule number 1 that you see in that example. One advantage of a decision table over a decision tree is that it's harder to look or to overlook a particular combination of factors that lead to a specific outcome. So for analysis purposes, this is actually a bit nicer model to use. Some people find the tree are just easier to read though. At the end of the discussion, I will point you to our book where we also describe all these models in a lot more detail if you're particularly excited by the modeling aspects. Next in our requirements approach, we have to elicit requirements about how the results are going to get used. So some analytics results are used by humans to make a decision to take an action. While, for example, executives sitting around a boardroom look at dashboards and decide to change their strategy for Q2. Right? That's humans using analytics. Many analytics results are used by other systems though. For example, you go to a grocery store and at checkout you get 10 different coupons printed for you. If you look at those coupons, they're targeted at you. This is an example of a system taking an analytics output and doing something with it. In this case, feeding them to a coupon printing system. So similarly, when websites display personalized ads with information about you, that's a system using analytics results to do the particular marketing. And at a fundamental level, you've got to understand this level of usage because that will drive so much about your requirements. So just step back and say, are people using this or are systems using the data out of them? And if you're delivering analytics results to systems, the requirements are actually a little less interesting. You will probably have to look at system interface requirements more than anything. But I think the more interesting questions come when you have people trying to use the results in some way. So you have to think about 3 types of things here, right? What's the delivery mechanism of the results? How's it physically made available to the end user? It could be an email application, it could be a mobile device, etc. Yeah, think about the format of the results. So how are you going to display it? Is it a report? Is it some kind of a dashboard view? Or is it raw data or somewhere in between? And then what kind of flexibility do they need in the results? To what extent must a user be able to manipulate the information following the delivery? For example, a lot of times I see executives want dashboards that give them a view, but they want to be able to come in and flip different switches to drill down in the data is what I'll say. That's becoming, I think, a pretty common usage of data, but we've got to understand that in our analysis so that we can build the system to support that. And you might be wondering, is what I'm talking about here any different than doing reporting requirements of the past? And I'll say yes and no to that. If you want to show a standard report out of the analytics work, then this part of the requirements, like how the requirements or how the data gets used, is really no different than what you've done in the before. Use your report table models for that kind of a thing. But what I will say is analytics is shifting from standard static reporting towards more interactivity, more predictive analysis. So typically we're seeing people want that flexibility where they can drill down, they can do the filtering on the data. For that, you're going to need a bit more specification because it's not just about displaying seemingly static data. It's about the interfaces to really capture the degrees of flexibility needed. Next, we have the data requirements themselves. These are not database requirements. We're not designing a database here, but we're developing requirements that would help someone do that. And there's 4 types of data requirements that we're going to look at here. The one thing I want to do is emphasize, though, that this is one of the less glamorous parts of these projects, but one of the most important. A lot of the requirements that come out here are going to be non-functional requirements, and I find that people skimp on those. They gloss right through them, and that's very, very dangerous, particularly on these projects. When you're dealing with so much data, you've got to think about things like performance, because if you don't, you're going to have data and no way to actually get it fast enough. All right, so we need to look at data sources, things like what data do you need? What attributes do you need? Where is that data coming from? And also think about, are the sources changing over time? In big data, that is a reality now, that over time we want to link in new sources pretty fast. For example, our facial recognition software in the grocery store, our scenario on that will have source facial images that maybe come from things like social media profiles. Well, over time, those social media sources will change, right? I created this slide before, and I look at it now, and I think I probably should add Instagram to that list. Because that's become, over the last couple of years, much, much bigger. Second category is that storage, right? Again, how much data is there today and how much do I expect that data to grow over time? The nature of big data is that the volume of data might be growing and even exponentially so. So you've got to plan for that. Right now, for example, maybe we only have 150,000 customer records in our grocery store that have facial images associated with them. But we would expect that number to grow maybe by a rate of 10x every quarter. Right? That helps our database designers plan for this accordingly. Data management and governance, we have to think about the rules that govern that data. Do we need to take data from disparate sources and transform them so they can be used together in the same analysis? Do we have to archive the data at any point? Right? And again, in our case, maybe the system has to encrypt all of our customer data or raw customer data for legal policies because I've got some of their personal information in there. And then the fourth category is talking about how the extraction of the data, things like how fast do users need to get results? Do you need real-time or batch data to feed them? And in our scenario, the system has to display the video ad within 3 seconds. So there's definitely a response time there. Otherwise, the customer won't be in the viewing area anymore. But that said, do I need real-time data about that person in terms of like images? Not necessarily, right? I just work with what I have, and maybe tonight an upload happens and I have more data, and that would be fine. But it's, again, thinking about those kinds of things. All right, traditional data requirements models are great if you have structured data, but the nature of big data is you're going to have unstructured or semi-structured data. And unstructured data doesn't lend itself to representation in traditional what we call rows and columns. Voicemails, text messages, those are examples of unstructured data. And the challenge with this data is that sometimes you don't know what you're looking for in the data. So for example, software operated by a security-related, like a government agency, might scan internet traffic for the word bomb. But they've got to know it in context to know what it even means, because it could be a terrorist threat, or it could refer to a person jumping into a photo right before it's taken, or maybe it's a bad play's opening night, right? So that word needs some context around it, and that's what's dangerous about just looking at the raw data. The good news is most data out there does have some structure to it, metadata, or fully structured as the case may be. Semi-structured would be things like emails, image files, and because there's some metadata there, that allows you to start to use your more traditional data modeling techniques. But know that this is a space that I feel like is pretty unexplored still. The last part of our requirements approach is we've got to understand what are the analyses that transform the data. Because again, data alone isn't helpful. Transforming that data is where the real power of analytics comes to the forefront. And I think of this as like the computational engine behind analytics projects. So we've got to understand how's it transformed, how's it manipulated, maybe calculations that are done on the data. And these could be either business rules in the organization or maybe industry standard calculations that define them. Just as a very simple example, if an analysis that you're working on includes reporting gross profit margin by region, then you've somewhere got to specify how you actually calculate that. All right, so again, those are common, I think, business rules that we're used to working with today. Now, I love this quote because it exemplifies the nature of analytic solutions. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You get the gist of it if you're looking at it. But the major challenge with analytics is that often the possibilities are endless, and there are so many unknowns. We don't always know what we're looking for. We don't always know the full capability of the solution either that we're buying or bought. We can't even begin to imagine what we might want to know. And so that is a very cool thing, and that is a very scary thing for organizations because there's so much that we could potentially do. But there's a couple things we can do to kind of open our minds and think outside the box. Think about creative brainstorming techniques here, because those can be your friend in these situations. But one thing you could do is think about the time frame that you want to analyze, right? Are they looking for insights about the past? Do they want to know what's going on right now? Or do they want to look at what's happening in the future? One of the most valuable aspects of analytics systems is that they can enable future state, strategic analysis, exploring like what I would call what if scenarios. For example, if our customer could receive their product the same day they ordered it, how much more would they buy from us? Right? So those are the kinds of conversations you're going to have with people to help them zero in on what kind of decisions they want to make. And like I said, creative thinking I think is key here. There's so many unknowns that I think our executive stakeholders who want these projects in place have got to be creative as well. Our job in the analysis role is really to help them be creative and to help them think outside the box, right? So we're going to use all kinds of tools to help facilitate that thinking process, things like understanding what decisions they want to make, what kinds of problems do they want to solve, asking lots of open-ended questions around those topics. Maybe give them examples of the kinds of things that are possible. I would say go out and read white papers about what other companies are doing, and bring ideas back to your team. Look at the analytics tools that you have. What do they allow you to do? What's even possible in those? Ask lots of what if questions, and then just expose the data potentially in a way that helps them explore it themselves. And one of the things that you've got to know about these projects, there's going to be a lot of back and forth and iteration in these projects, even after they're deployed potentially. So you've got to be ready for your requirements to evolve as well. In a dream world, a user is going to ask a question, get her data, run analytics, receive a report, make a decision, and then she's done. That's the dream world though. This is a picture of reality, right? It usually starts with a question, we get some data, we run our analytics, we get a report that contains what we think is the relevant information to make our decision. But once we see that information, the user will think of a new question, which leads us to request new reports and do more analysis yet, right? And to really drive this point home, this is what it actually looks like, because oftentimes I get all of that and I still can't do anything with the results. So before I make any decisions, I've got to go back and get new data to be obsessed, and just basically I end up in this looping process. And that is reality again. That is not an annoying state. That is because we don't know what we don't know right now. Our director of marketing here at C-Level was joking with me recently that our president does this to her almost every week. He looks at her marketing metrics, notices what's interesting or not, maybe they make some decisions, but often he ends up wondering about something new, kind of related usually, but yet a new question. So he asks her to go back and tweak her report and show him something else next week. And this literally happens week after week after week with her. And it's not that he's a bad person and being annoying, it's that he's coming up with new questions and really wants to get more data. So given that it's an iterative in nature, there's a lot of unknowns, the key for doing our requirements on these projects is to start somewhere, okay? The requirements might change over time, and that's okay. Let's try to predict how much we think they might change at least. So begin with stakeholders. What do they already know that they want to learn from the information available, right? And then plan, for their questions to evolve. So again, start somewhere. What's the one question they know they want to answer first? Then think about, okay, how much do we think it's going to change, right? Do they think that they're pretty close to knowing what they want? So that's a little bit of change. Or do they think that their needs from this business analytics solution is going to change significantly over time? And if so, then they might need a solution that's easily adaptable and requires more minimal additional development work, right? So you really got to figure out which of these paths are you on early in your process. This is a whole different talk, but this, to me, brings out the idea of if there's going to be a lot of change, I would encourage an agile approach to development over something more like a waterfall. All right, let's finish up with just a couple things to take away immediately out of this talk. Number one, I told you this is an important point and I don't want you to forget it, that, and I think this is probably the most important thing to take away, that applies to not just analytics projects, but really any kind of project where you're doing any kind of reporting. And that's that people aren't looking at data for fun. They don't need reports just in case. I find stakeholders who want reports, treating them like a security blanket. Just in case I need to look at it, can you make sure you build that report in, right? They need to have a business justification for the report, and that report is the decision they want to make from the data. Again, so people don't look at data for fun, they use it to make decisions, and use that to prioritize your scope or to cut scope when there isn't a decision that they're going to make. And here's a couple requirements models that you can use in your project that I showed you today. There's definitely some references I can point you to for a little bit more detail. For example, we didn't talk about display action response models. That's how you model user interface requirements. But the rest of these, you at least got a glimpse of them today. And certainly there's more information you can dig into. You can reach out to me online, certainly as well. But whether you're doing analytics or not, I will tell you visual models can be really helpful to making sure you get your requirements right. And so today I'm hoping that you at least got some takeaway of how you could use them in this kind of project. All right, and then there's a few pitfalls that I want you to keep in mind as you head down this path. First of all, the effects are real time in these solutions. So think about how fast information is propagated with the internet. There's that story from last year of a PR executive who sent a tweet and then shut off her phone and flew to South Africa. And by the time she had landed, she'd become famous in international media because it was such an insensitive tweet. And there's some irony there because she's in a public relations role. But the point is, internet makes things very real time, and the effects of analytics, they can be fast and they can be harmful if it goes wrong. So you've got to be careful about what you're doing with your brand, or privacy issues and things like that. Second one is that, it's related to that. Be careful not to automate something in the wrong way. So there's an example of software that scans social media and makes stock trade movements accordingly. Well, 2 years ago, there was an incorrect social media report that our president was injured in an explosion, which caused one of these systems to start selling stocks, which led other systems to start selling stocks. And there was an actual market decline that happened. And all of this because of an incorrect news release, right? And fortunately, the hoax was discovered quickly and humans intervened and unrolled all of that. But I share this example because even though software was actually behaving as it was built, it was not behaving as people wanted it to behave, right? So there's a very subtle difference there. And as a business analyst, our job is to find these edge cases and make sure we're planning for them. And finally, this is something that you can do immediately as a business analyst, really in any kind of context, but be careful about what you allow your teams to prioritize. If you don't do proper requirements efforts, you can spend a lot of time building complex analytic solutions that don't allow you to answer the questions that really matter in your organization. And then finally, here is some recommended reading for you if you're really excited about this topic. I'm a little biased on the top two books because I co-authored both of them. The first one actually has a chapter on analytics and requirements very specifically. The second one is the one I was referencing where we talk about requirements models, very, very practical focused in terms of giving you some guidance on how to use the models, lots of examples and templates and things like that. There's a white paper that describes what I talked today, but in paper format, if you'd like to look at it in that particular version as well. And then I've got a bunch of books listed up here that I think are my favorite books on the topics of big data and analytics that help me learn a lot more about this particular space. And then some links about some organizations that support this. So there's lots of information out there. These are just some of my particular favorites. And I want to very quickly also, I want to thank DigiBytes for sponsoring this webinar. There is a wealth of material on their website that you can access as well, certainly on this topic and many, many more topics. So I encourage you to check out that if you haven't. And with that, I'm going to go grab some of the questions and see if I can answer a few. All right, let's see. So if you haven't put your questions in, go ahead and do that right now. Here's just a modeling specific question. Could we use a swim lane diagram instead of a decision requirements diagram? So I might pronounce this wrong, but Ruchi, thank you, great question. So I think that the answer is yes, and maybe not instead of. So a swim lane diagram, absolutely beneficial. You should be. It's a rare project where I don't use what I would either call a process flow or a process model or a swim lane diagram to understand the end-to-end process. What I will say is that the decision requirements diagram shows the information maybe in a slightly different way. So you would use your swim lane diagram to figure out what some of the decisions are, where some of the data is coming from, but I actually think you could use those two models together potentially. But if I were to pick one, I would personally start with your swim lane diagram first. So there's a question here. Can I know the various software programs that are used to analyze data? I'm just going to quickly answer this because I don't want to start naming off a bunch of different programs, but I at least want to make this audience aware that there are many software programs out there for doing analytics. I don't have a personal preference. I've seen customers deploy variations. I've seen someone try to build their own. I don't see that very often though. So know that there's a ton of solutions out there for doing analytics in existing software, but the catch with that is you can't just drop that solution in place. You've still got to do due diligence to figure out how it should be configured, what the business rules are that need to be implemented, and that kind of thing. Okay, so here's a good question. How are privacy concerns addressed? And what I will say about that one is, great question. You absolutely should be thinking about it. And I don't know, that question may have come up in the context of something I was saying specifically, so I apologize if I'm not connecting the dots on that. But what I will say is that when you're dealing with this amount of data, And sometimes that personal kind of data, you've got to think about that. And this is one of the things that as analysts, we've got to think about the requirements for. So we can't just go blindly into this, grabbing all kinds of data and exposing it. We've got to think about what are any legal ramifications of what we're doing. And so you're going to probably be working with your legal departments to understand that. Potentially even understanding the policies in some good depth yourself, just so that you guys don't make a misstep on that particular thing. Here's a question on how can a waterfall approach of SDLC be used for data analytics? On this particular one, I'm a big proponent that I feel like you could use pretty much any approach to development, be it waterfall to agile, incremental, iterative, anywhere in there will be fine. You just have to be careful. This is a hard question for me to answer because I actually think a pure waterfall approach isn't the right approach for any software project, only because you can't know exactly what all the requirements are going to be up front on a kind of a big bang approach where you're going to spend a lot of time building a solution. You can do it, but I would plan at least for an iterative, maybe just a longer cycle of iterations if that's what your organization needs. So just like any other project in this case, you're going to do the best you can at defining the requirements up front, and then you're going to implement them typically in a packaged software that you've purchased. And you're going to do testing on it and you're going to roll it out. And that approach will work in an analytics project. But what I will say is that you will need to plan for future iterations because people don't know what the capabilities are until they get to play with it a little bit. So maybe during your requirements phase, try and get some prototypes or demos from your vendor and things like that. That might help at least. Okay, so I'm going to answer a question that came up when I was giving an example here. This is a question from Rob. What are the business goals and objectives for having displays in stores? And the question that Rob is asking here is the perfect question to be asked, is what I will say. And the reason for that is I didn't actually talk about it, but I should have. And when I was creating the scenario, I was absolutely thinking about it. At the end of the day, in my particular example, it's a made-up scenario, but I would imagine the executives would have some kind of objective of trying to sell more of, for example, high-margin products. All right, and so they're going to want to push those to their customers. They're going to want to do it in a real-time way, right? So you have this woman who's looking at chips, and they want to push a particular brand of milk on her. They're going to do it in a way that they're going to catch her eye. And so it's all about selling more in this particular case. Now, regardless of what my scenario was, Rob's question's spot on. That is the very first thing you should do in any analytics solution is figure out what are the business objectives for it. What's the goal? And it's got to be related to something like increasing revenue, sales, potentially cutting costs. They're usually financially related, is what I'm trying to say. So fantastic question with that. All right, one more question let's take from Jerry. What technology-oriented businesses, for example, connected vehicles, do you see big data as a major contributor to its success or growth? This is an interesting one. I think that I would have a hard time figuring out ones where it was not related. I think connected vehicles is a fantastic example, an exciting example of that. I would also say healthcare is not really a technology-oriented business, but that is a space where I'm seeing big data and analytics more prevalent than actually anywhere else. I think that there's some interesting things going on right now with urban development in cities, and how do we use data better to serve the community. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. So I don't think it's just technology-oriented. Maybe these are just the ones that are exciting to me. I think the entertainment business, the example I gave where they're using immediate real-time audience feedback to start driving what shows they're creating or not creating. So it's going to touch everything. That's my prediction on this.
Okay. Thank you, Joy, for a very informative presentation. This concludes today's event. Have a great day.